Welcome back to Burnout Break Room, the podcast that's like a break room but helpful, where we look at burnout through a realistic lens, talk about ways to take a break from the grind, and spill the tea.
I'm Caitlin Truhello, creativity coach and speaker.
And I'm Lyndie Larimore, licensed therapist, certified career coach, and consultant. We're your hosts, and thank you for joining us here in the Burnout Break Room. Hi, Caitlin.
Hey, Lindy, what's up?
I'm excited for this episode. I love any opportunity to go off script and break the rules a little bit. And I feel like that's what we're doing today.
I love a good rebel moment. Mm-hmm.
Because screw the man, you know?
Yes, and with a rebel yell, we are going to cry myths today.
Mm. Wow, this feels so important suddenly.
No pressure.
So, which myths are you going to cover, Caitlin? What kind of myths are you going to talk about?
I'm going to talk about different myths as they relate to creativity. Who has it, who doesn't, and what happens when we think we can bottle it and when it runs amok.
I love it. I'm excited. I'm excited because I feel like I probably buy into a lot of these myths. So I'm ready to be debunked. And I will be talking about myths about therapy and therapists.
Mm, I'm looking
Uh,
forward to those ones for sure.
I'm not a little bit because I don't mind some of the myths that are out there about therapists. I kind of like fully embrace them,
hmm
which we'll hear more about. So I'm a little bit sad that I'm about to debunk some of these cool things that people think about therapists that are definitely not real.
New and developing Lindy as the gotcha journalist for therapists.
I know I'm going to start getting letters. You weren't supposed to tell anyone, Lyndie. I know. I didn't
Mm.
want to, but here we are. We're breaking the rules.
So, which one are you most hesitant to share?
Oh, we're starting at the top, huh? We're going there
Mm-hmm.
first. All right. Definitely the one about therapists. Oh, yeah. This is the one that I don't love debunking.
Mm.
Therapists have their lives completely together.
I'm
I
shocked.
know. I know. I know everyone is collectively gasping. Therapists definitely do not. And oftentimes, the joke is behind the scenes that most of them are kind of the opposite. But I say that in jest. Therapists usually are dealing with just as much as you are. The hope is that, they've collected some ways of coping and are practicing what they preach.
Mm.
I think there are a lot of people out there that do. I've certainly met some that don't. And just like in any other job, you've got some people that are really good and some people that are struggling. You know what I mean? Like it's
Hmm.
the same as any other profession. The other thing too is like therapists also, so there's like, yes, do they have mental health struggles? Yeah, absolutely. Like, and oftentimes that's why they go into the field, but also they have bad days, they have
Mm.
divorces and breakups, they've lost people in their lives. We'll often talk about like going to the place of growth with a client. So every therapist has a growth edge. So sometimes the people that we work with kind of come up to that growth edge, and the therapist realizes, ooh, I have to do some growing here if I'm going to be able to like
Mm.
support this person. And I
Mm-hmm.
think the really good therapists are using supervision well so that they can recognize that when it happens. Sometimes it's hard to catch. So, jokes aside, this is also a reminder that, if you feel like your therapist is bringing their own stuff into a session in a way that's disrupting your work, that's never
Mm.
okay. And it's
Mm-hmm.
okay to please ask them to stop or find a new therapist. It's not okay for a therapist to bring their stuff into a
Mm.
session, their unworked stuff. They might share, but it should feel appropriate and towards
Relevant,
your
yeah.
relevant and moving towards your own growth and treatment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think there's in that way, like there's a big difference between using personal experience as a guide as opposed to shifting the spotlight.
Hmm. Hmm.
Hmm.
If you feel like you've become your therapist, which happens a lot, I wish I could
Hmm.
say that's kind of an unusual thing. It's not. Then it's time to get a new therapist.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And honestly, I think the other way of looking at this is not so much focusing on that your therapist or therapists in general don't have their life together, but that is also going to allow them to empathize more greatly with the people that they work with because it's that constant reminder where we're all human, we all put on pants one leg at a time, and also recognizing as you were saying like that room for growth. And correct me if I'm wrong, Lyndie, but it is also my understanding that it is not only common but an encouraged practice for therapists to, at least different points, have therapists of their own as well.
Oh, absolutely. I just saw mine today. She's great. Yes. I feel strongly that that's a really important. Not that people have to be in therapy all the time. That's also a
Mm,
myth that I want to debunk, that therapy has to be a lifelong practice. It can be, I guess, but like then I'd start to wonder like what are you doing in therapy, if that makes sense. Like I
mm,
think it can come in phases, and I encourage people to see a few different therapists, not at a time, but throughout their lives, because you
mm-hmm,
get different perspectives and theories. And but yeah, therapists, when they need therapy, should go to therapy and often do. A lot of graduate school programs will do group therapy with therapists
mm,
so that they can get an experience of group therapy, but it's also meant to be a way for them to just do a little of their own work. And some will insist that they be in therapy, especially like psychoanalytic programs will insist that they be psychoanalyzed. So, yeah, absolutely.
especially in terms of like having a full circle, like complete cycle of recognition and being rooted in the community, like within your field.
Mhm.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, yeah. For myself, I will share, I find it important to be just grounded enough, no matter what's happening, so that when I'm sitting in front of someone, I can bring my full attention to them
Mm,
emotionally and psychologically. Requires a certain level of mindfulness practice, requires a certain level of brushing up on my skills and knowledge so that I feel like I know how to support them.
mm,
And it requires a certain level of emotional work, because any one of us at some point or another always get tripped up on something. Like we have buttons
mm,
because of our past, or because so in supervision we'll talk a lot about what are your buttons. Like let's get to know your buttons so that sometimes you see it coming, sometimes you don't, but you want to have done enough work on your buttons if you can so
mm.
that it doesn't erupt in a session in a way that's disruptive.
Right, right. And honestly, that sounds like a combination of both career work, bringing your best professional self to this space, but also taking care of your personal self too, being aware of things that can come up for you individually.
Well said, Caitlin. Well said. You can do some supervision work now. You just described supervision. So tell me about some myths about creativity.
The first myth that I want to address, because it's also the one that sincerely makes me angry, and I'll explain why. The myth that a person is either creative or they are not. And this concept also tends to get lumped in with the very antiquated idea that the right hemisphere of the brain is creative and the left side is purely logical. Now, there is a degree of truth to seeing which parts of the brain are activated during different activities. However, they are minimal when talking about creative activities. So we use both hemispheres of our brain relatively equally when
Mhm,
doing different tasks.
mhm,
And of course, those, not to get into neurology, but of course, you also have different parts of the brain that are relevant to how we operate as humans. But the fundamental myth here is that every single person is creative in their own capacity. And whether that is manifested in what seem to be bigger, more obvious ways, or if they're a little bit more subtle, it still applies.
Yeah, I think I bought into that myth very much so. Or that almost like certain kinds of creativity are like real creativity while others are fake creativity.
Mm,
Like,
hmm.
I always thought of myself for years as not being creative because I wasn't artistic.
You hit the nail right on the head, Lindy. And that's a another myth as well. We can kind of, I'll roll these all into one as they're very, very closely related. But so many people consider, even if they do practice some form of art, if they are not a quote unquote professional artiste,
Mhm.
then they are not creative. And again, like these definitions that we apply to ourselves are so oftentimes not helpful for two reasons. First of all, because when you align your identity with your capacity to do something exclusively on whether or not you perform that thing professionally, it's a huge disservice to us as a person because
Mhm.
even just speaking anthropologically,
Mhm.
jobs haven't existed for the entire time that we've been alive. It's kind of like that age-old question, what's your dream job? It's like, well, I don't dream of labor. And and so there's a lot of de-influencing to be done when we talk about disassociating or detaching the idea of our individual value coming from the work that we do. Work is very purposeful and it is very fulfilling. And especially when you can use your own individual form of creativity in that work
Mhm.
and see the fruits of it, and especially how it, can positively impact people or projects, that is very important. But you are not defined by simply just the job that you hold. We are so much more than that. And in the same way, you can dabble in watercolors or you can play with like air dry clay, or another great differentiator is the different types of creativity. Just because it doesn't appear to be artistic in some capacity or even aesthetic, there are still many different ways to use creativity. And I'll use an example from your line of work, Lindy. Having interpersonal creativity, being able to have a conversation with someone where you can create a space that is open, welcoming, and transparent, and above all, safe,
Mhm.
where you can actively listen to someone and not only hear what they're saying, but also make sure that they feel heard. And then, of course, you have the clinical element there as well, where you can kind of read between the lines and look at the different contexts between what they're saying to understand on a deeper level or on a clinical level what they may be experiencing so that you can best help them in that scenario.
Mhm. Well said, Caitlin. Yeah, and I'd honestly never thought of that as creativity. I've thought of therapy as like, good improv or as a process of flow. But yeah, it can be very, very creative and it is a form of art. So thank you. I myth debunked.
Yes. And you heard it here first. Lindy Larimore is an artist.
Aw,
She is
yay.
very creative.
Oh, wow, that was cool. And Caitlin is a therapist supervisor. So I think we're just figuring our different careers paths out as we go. Um,
Yes.
I want to bring this myth up. It's not necessarily one of the most interesting myths, but this is something that I hear a lot when I meet new clients for the first time. And it's this idea that therapists are just paid to listen.
Mm,
And the way that I hear that is one of the things that I try to do when I'm first meeting with folks is give them an idea of like, this is my style, this is how I approach therapy. It's very collaborative, it's very much consensual. Like we come up with a game plan together, we create a roadmap before we do anything so that I can make sure I'm supporting your goals and not my idea of your goals and my bias of what wellness should look like.
mm,
And oftentimes what I hear people say is when they talk about therapy in the past, they'll say, all my therapist did was listen. And it was helpful to vent, but I didn't feel like I came away with any solutions.
mm,
And, and yes, sometimes I keep in mind that sometimes that was that person's experience and there might have been a little more nuance to it or whatever, but I hear this constantly. And I always make the joke that I can't shut up for 50 minutes. So it's impossible physically for me to not talk. But there is, I think, maybe when therapy first happened, it was quite literally someone sitting behind you as you were laying down. You couldn't even see them, and they were silent the whole time taking notes, and you were doing free association. Like that was a very
mm-hmm,
common form of therapy. They some of them wouldn't even talk to you. They would only talk to your husband, right? Like if you were a woman, a married woman, or your father if you were an unmarried woman.
mm,
And for years, it didn't quite super grow beyond like the experience. Theories changed, social work came on the picture and everything, but I think there was still this kind of psychodynamic or clean slate idea. Therapists were taught to be a clean slate for a lot of years, which meant that like
mm,
you were meant to be merely a reflective surface, which caused therapists to feel like I really can't bring my full self to a session. I can't be my full self. I can't disclose anything ever. The more silent I am, the better the experience for them. And of course, there are times when that's important, and I can certainly learn to shut up more myself, but most people find that not that helpful. And it also implies a certain level of privilege that the person across from you has. So it's, if we think in terms of if therapy is just a place for you to figure out how to be more self actualized because all of your other problems are solved, then great, sure. You can probably do a lot of that work yourself. But if you can do a lot of that work yourself, probably don't need therapy. But very few people come to therapy with all of their financial, physical, relational, or cultural problems solved and without
mm,
stressors there. So I think one of the things that's grown and changed, hopefully, about therapy is therapists are really required to understand the cultural implications of the world that someone lives in or the kind of biases that they encounter every day and really are meant to be a little more dynamic than that clean slate idea that we were taught not that long ago.
mm. That is definitely fascinating, and especially considering the history of how therapy specifically is administered and between the different styles. And I wonder, Lindy, if in your experience, especially as, we start to talk more about mental health and making time for not only making space, but recognizing when we might need more support with our mental health. Do you find that people are more able to show up to therapy, either having an idea of how to describe what it is that they want to work on, or is it more of I'm aware of this feeling I this experience that I don't like, and I need to talk to somebody about it.
That is a good question, Caitlin. Let me make sure I understand it. So the question is, are people coming to therapy equipped with a certain level of knowledge of maybe like the diagnosis that they're experiencing or some general idea of what's going on and even maybe ways of treating? Or is it that they are coming almost as a blank slate and just saying, I'm feeling not great. What's going on? Yeah, that has changed actually pretty drastically, I think, in the last 5 years or so because
Mm,
of social media.
mm,
So before really TikTok, I would say there and a little bit Instagram, a little bit YouTube. Not only did people not have as much knowledge, but there was far more stigma.
mm,
And one thing that as much as social media can be a mixed bag, one thing that social media has done a beautiful job of is providing education on actual mental health and like diagnosis and what it looks like in real life, and I'm a real person and I have blah and this is what my life looks like. But this is stuff that people really didn't have access to not that long ago.
mm-hmm,
But also there are certain diagnoses that at one point we were even told as therapists, like, if you diagnose someone with this, like, probably don't tell them, or maybe just don't diagnose them, like, even though it's a real thing. An example of that is borderline personality disorder. The common idea was it's so stigmatized that, like,
mm,
be really careful with that one. And it's true, like, you want to be very knowledgeable in any diagnosis that you treat in your diagnostic process and you're in picking the appropriate treatment. But there was this kind of underlying, like, you might diagnose them but probably don't tell them.
mm,
I found that to be so wildly patronizing and in no way helpful,
mm-hmm,
because then the person has no idea what's happening and why. But also now, because of social media, they're often coming to me and saying, I think I might have borderline personality disorder. We'll sit down and we'll talk about it. So there's a lot more knowledge out there. And I found it to be overall pretty helpful.
mm. Yeah. And I mean, just speaking for myself, I definitely find it to be very useful in, seeing the different information that's out there. And I remember learning specifically in, my even just Psych 101 that that is why diagnosing is taken so seriously because, I mean, first of all, in terms of some conditions, they result in a permanent diagnosis. It's not something that, rather, it's something that's going to be associated with that person for the rest of their lives. And I remember such an extensive conversation about this too, especially in the renaming of different diagnoses as well, because it's intended to prevent overdiagnosing, especially as new information is learned about different experiences and different things that people are experiencing in order to prevent overdiagnosing of that thing. So yeah, seeing the responsibility of that, but also people recognizing their own responsibility for their mental health, I think is an incredible shift.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah, it's more empowering to the individual when they feel like they have more tools. And oftentimes they're teaching me things that they've learned and I'm learning along with them. So it's actually kind of nice. So, Caitlin, what's another myth?
Another creativity myth is that in order to be a creative person, you have to follow your own rules. Or rather, this could go both ways, that you either have to follow the rules of whatever creative practice that you're doing, or the only way to be a real artist, like the like the rebellious painter or what have you, that you can't follow the rules at all.
Hmm. Hmm.
And the thing is that both of those are a myth because whatever art that you are practicing, which, I mean, this goes directly back to what we were just talking about in understanding the responsibility of what you're doing and that there are reasons why there are best practices to doing that thing.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean that, especially in more subjective areas like the humanities, so to say, that you have to follow every single rule because if we worked that way, then there wouldn't be a lot of difference between the arts that were created, right? But the important thing to remember here is that this mentality comes directly out of the Renaissance
Mm.
when you had this burgeoning new interest for the arts, you had patrons for the arts, and even to the degree where certificates were specifically made and administered to those who were considered professional occupational artists.
Mm.
And so that established a mentality that in order to be a creative or to be an artist, it was like a certificate that you had to earn. And you only earned this by going through the trade and the practice and being taught by an extremely accomplished artist, which, of course, as we know, this mentality and this practice is not only incredibly exclusionary, but doesn't recognize the fact that, again, as we were talking about before, creativity and art is not just about how you make money.
Well, and there's a piece to that too, Caitlin, that's the Western, the Renaissance movement was very Western. And correct me if I'm wrong, but like a very kind of white movement, right? Like when I think of Renaissance, it's mostly like European, right? Am I getting that right?
It is European. It is Western in that elitist mentality, and especially how it was based around key families.
Mm.
And so it wasn't just about, this artist of a, notable name created this piece, is that it was commissioned for the Medici family or, had a prominent place in the Sistine Chapel. And so the importance was placed on these works and these individuals based on the money behind it. And
Mm.
so when you have an elitist approach to art and creativity, what happens first? You assign creativity a socioeconomic value and
Mhm.
therefore excluding people who are not able to be taught by the very few, professionals that were available to learn the rules, the quote unquote rules of how to make high art. And this is also where the mentality of the difference between high art and low art. And so
Mhm.
one of the things that I love to talk about, especially, with my experience in literature and writing, is this mentality of highbrow literature and low literature. So, for example, like if someone says, "Oh, I only read Harry Potter," or "I only read, young adult books," then that is seen as less valid and less valued than if you're reading, high literature like in the classics, or for somebody who maybe they don't know a lot about classic literature whatsoever. Somehow that makes them, not worthy of having discussions around literature, around stories, around fiction or nonfiction, which of course, as we know, just is not true. And as we learn in literature, there is a benefit to understanding the difference between how we arrive at different categorizations of high literature and low literature, but all the while remembering that they are both valid, they are both important. Me for myself, as much as I really do love classic literature, I do like reading, a cozy mystery once in a while and opportunities to take a break from really heavy concept or really complex narratives. And so they're both absolutely worthy. And so when you're looking to express whatever form of creativity it is that you align with, you can use different rules as they apply. Just because you don't follow particular rules does not make you less worthy of this space.
Mhm. Absolutely. You're reminding me, Caitlin, what I was kind of trying to vocalize as you were talking, I was remembering this wonderful TED Talk that I highly recommend everyone go and see right now. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's The Danger of a Single Story.
Mm,
Chimamanda is a Nigerian author And she does a beautiful job of talking about all of the messaging that she received as a girl and as a woman about like who's allowed to tell the story, and as a Nigerian girl and woman, and as a Black girl and woman, like all the different ways in which I think there was messaging that her story wasn't the single story that was supposed to be told. Basically, it's a great TED Talk. And she wrote books, really great books, such as We Should All Be Feminists, Zecora, Half of a Yellow Sun. So, yeah, highly recommend just reading something of hers, but also that TED Talk. It feels kind of like what you're talking about.
Mm. Yeah, that's a great recommendation, and we can definitely include the link to that video in the show notes.
Fabulous. I have one more myth to share. This is a big one that I hear often, and I think it's actually a big barrier for men in therapy is that therapy is only about feelings.
Mm,
And it can certainly feel that way, but actually, like there's of a lot of different things that are addressed in therapy, such as behavior change, changing habits, problem solving, life planning. I'm a career coach, so we do a lot of stuff around work. I talk a lot about work with folks, relationships, of course. There's a lot of different things that are, and there are some theories that are based really more on your thoughts than your feelings, really.
mm,
So there should be some feelings element, like emotional work done in therapy, or else that's more coaching. But even coaching brings some feelings work. But really, it's meant to cover a bunch of stuff. And I promise we do have more questions than just how does that make you feel?
Oh, that is my favorite, especially like a meme-worthy moment.
It's my least favorite, and I hate answering that question. So I try to avoid it myself.
But it definitely makes sense. And, speaking for myself, I remember the first time I ever had therapy, it was surrounding or like directly related to a difficult time in my life. And one of the first things they asked me was, have there been any changes in, external stressors in your life? Like what is taking more of your energy and your time? And even just going through that question was a really big mind shift for me because even just recognizing, you know, it's this one change in my life is not the only thing that is causing things to feel more difficult. And also like recognizing being able to take a step back and put all those things in perspective and say, you know what, for all of these stressors and all of these changes and everything that is influencing my energy and like what is required of me in this time, I'm actually doing pretty good. Like what a different, mindset shift there. So even just asking a simple question like that can be extremely helpful.
Mhm. Yeah. Even just like, is there another way to think of this, or is there something else going on that could be affecting this? Yeah, absolutely. We're so quick to blame ourselves for things that aren't going right. And oftentimes, very rarely is it ever 100% the fault of the person sitting in front of me.
Mm, hmm. Yeah. And
Mhm.
of course, humans being complex creatures, everything that we do and we are is in flux. And
Mhm.
so taking the time to recognize, like, we have to be gentle with ourselves.
Mm, mm. Yes, absolutely. How about another creativity mythbuster from you?
The first part here is the myth that in order to create something that is worthy, that thing has to be new. And first of all, just right off the bat, one of my favorite quotes from Shakespeare is, "There is nothing new under the sun."
Uh-huh.
And it reminds me of another TED Talk by Kurt Vonnegut, where he looks at a few basic plot structures that are the basis of essentially every story that we see today.
Mm,
Everything from, boy meets girl and man in a hole. And there's a video on this one too, and I can share the link to that. And so there really is nothing new under the sun. And so to put the pressure on yourself that in order to make something good, it has to be new, it has to be groundbreaking, it has to be something nobody's ever seen before, this is unfair.
Mm, mm,
And especially like establishing expectations for your creativity that are very difficult, if not impossible, to live up to.
mm,
It's essentially a form of artistic abuse against
mm,
ourselves
mm,
because it's not fair.
mm,
And that's also not an environment where creativity and, innovation can thrive. But the other way of looking at this is another myth is that burnout is the state of not being able to create anything.
mm,
And this is especially relating to in the context of someone who is specifically aware of their creativity style and how they like to express that. And I'm going to use a movie as an example. So for all the Studio Ghibli fans out there,
mm,
this one's for you, Kiki's Delivery Service.
mm,
And if you're not familiar with this one, the essence of the story is Kiki, as a young witch, moves away from home in order to study her practice and also to meet new people and experience life. And it's kind of a like that's what establishes this coming of age story. But it's not just the coming of age for her; it's the realization of what her, special abilities and what her passions are. And for her, it turns out to be flying. And the more that she uses this ability of flying and ends up turning it into the delivery service, Kiki's delivery service.
mm,
And then out of nowhere, she's not able to fly anymore. And it's this incredibly heartbreaking sequence of her questioning herself, questioning her abilities. What am I doing here? Am I not meant to do this at all? And she ends up befriending an artist who lives in the woods, my ideal life.
mm. Right? Yeah.
And they have these conversations about the relationship that you have with your art. And she tells Kiki a story of, when I was first learning to paint, it was really difficult. It seemed like I wasn't learning fast enough. And then I would practice and practice and practice, and I would fall asleep at my easel. One day I just couldn't paint anything. Nothing seemed to be good enough. And it got to the point where I didn't even want to, pick up a brush anymore. And Kiki asks her, well, what did you do? Because she sees, all the beautiful artwork surrounding her, woodland cabin. And she said, I stopped trying.
Mm,
I took a break and I directed I did other things. I took a walk. I, befriended some crows, go into town and meet up with friends.
mm,
And she said it was only after that time that, you begin to reconnect with your artistic vision and, you see a sunset in a different way and you hear from other people and you're able to reconnect with that artist that is
mm,
inside you
mm,
because of course we are very much a part of nature and
mm,
no element of nature produces 100% of the year. We all have seasons.
mm, mm,
And so, a big part of recognizing whether it's burnout or just taking a break from your creativity is absolutely a form of self-care.
mm. I think that's a mic drop moment. And I think that is the episode. Thank you, Caitlin. Beautiful wisdom. And I think a great depiction of burnout and knowing when to walk away from something, whether it's to restore or to even go in a different direction. So thank you for that.
And thank you, Lyndie, for debunking all of these myths for us, even the ones that, might make us feel a little bit more exposed.
Mhm.
But, I think it also reminds us that every single person is going through their own stuff, and a little bit of empathy goes a really long way.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, thanks, Caitlin, and I will see you next time.
See you next time.